see here, I've set as much stuff out as I could possibly set up. I'm gonna go over a couple things. I always put the base together using a little bit of extra speed. You do have a clutch on this. I also have V-hop wrenches that I like to use instead of little Allen keys. Though I do still use these for some of the parts, especially if I need to give it a little bit of extra torque, but instead of like this base, putting it together all slow and whatnot, I'll use a driver. These are the little U-fix-it trays, or I-fix-it. I like to put my hardware in there, and then I can move it all at once. I always keep a tape measure because I'm bad at judging size. I like the book. I've put a few of these together, but it's nice to just be able to have this to flip. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to try in one shot, if I screw up you'll see it, to put as much of this together as possible in one night. So if you want to stick around for that, yay. If you don't, I apologize. But I'm not necessarily going as fast as I can because I obviously want this printer to be good. I want it to work. But I've put a good bit of these together, so we're going to get moving and see how it goes. I'll give you gummy bears. I'm like scarfing down a Chick-fil-A sandwich over there. The Y-axis assembly, there's a lot of pre-fight stuff about like seating screws and things like that, and I'm not going to go over that. But when you get your manual, read it because it actually does help. A lot of you might say, oh, I'm going to set this aside or whatever else, or just scan the QR code and watch the videos. But actually, sitting down and reading it, they're telling you stuff for a reason. Sometimes screws fall out, things like that. It's actually helpful. So I am not going to read this to you guys much unless I stump myself. But basically, my goal was going to be to, using the manual and by what I've remembered, try to put this thing together in a reasonable time. We'll see how fast we can do it. So if you guys want to time me, great. If you don't, it's not going to hurt my feelings either way. Yes, I already said I'm cheating because I'm using this guy. Now, one of the things that I am going to do is I like to bump around because I am a picture person. So just seeing a picture of something helps me a lot. But something like this, I can start that, line it. Once you get one in, it really makes, especially if you're going to use power tools, don't tighten everything down. I know in this step they say it's pretty important not to tighten everything down. Once you get one in there like that, you'll see you've made your job a lot easier because it's standing itself up. This little install driver is nice because it doesn't have the anvil, it just has the clutch. So I'm not too worried about stripping anything out. You know, that is usually a concern. Back that off so I heard better. But I know that's usually a concern with power tools and anything, but extruded aluminum profiles, they tap these and you go too crazy on it and no bueno. This work surface is nice and flat, but I can tell you that when I true up my frames, I like to use a kitchen cooktop that is from like an electric range. That's the nice flat ones, because those typically that glass works out really well. I also have a big piece of like 3/8 inch plate glass that I keep on my coffee table, and if I'm doing it on my kitchen table is a farmhouse, and that thing is a mess. That thing is all wobbly and all over the place. I'm switching over to one of these ball end ones for inside these tight spots, because the tool can be at an angle and the screw will go in nice and true. Same thing on the bottom. I'm not tightening these up intentionally. So when I get them all in, I think you guys can see pretty well. One thing I will try to do is pay attention to what's on the screen. So if you guys ask questions, I will try to answer. Now, Instagram, sorry, I can't do that. I'm looking. Jake's girl might be watching a little bit, but I'm going to do my best. If I can respond, I will. If I can't, I apologize, but you certainly can comment on the video and I will chime in. Let's skip our ends. So here I'm going to push this off the edge of this desk and grab a screw, place it through one of the holes, get it to where it's turning, start it, and let it flop like that. Another screw, give it up, get it started, good to go. All right, now we'll just slide these away. So, yeah, I don't know what it's doing over there. I wonder if it's got a problem with me watching my own stream. Yes, I am a admin of the Packout group, Packout Hangout, Organization Nation, I like to call it. So is Jake's girl, she is my wife. She is also the Packout Princess, which she packs all of the orders. She reloads printers, all that good fun stuff. Do you guys like this little infinity thing going on down here? I think it's funny. I don't think it should hurt the stream too much. Okay, so first thing I notice, I always do this real quick. The side with the power supply needs to have the nice thing about using, but the power supply side needs these little profile nuts go down in here. This is one of the reasons why I also keep it loose, because if you do something like I did and forget these, and I'll turn the camera and show you these, but it'll pivot out of the way, no problem. Okay, so now, one of the steps that they're talking about is that you want to make sure this frame is loose, because you want to be able to adjust everything. And one of the benefits, oh yeah, the nuts I was talking about. They're right there, they slide in there, that's what your power supply goes on. This driver allows me, because it's got a ball end, to, especially if I keep the clutch low. It is brand new. tighten, not crazy. All of these, this frame pushes itself up off the ground. Okay, so what Prusa wants you to make sure you do, right, is that you keep this frame square, and that it's not square but flat on one plane, and then it's not wobbling. So they always tell you to like put pressure and then tighten these in opposite corners, sort of giving it a little down. So what I do, while it's still on a low clutch, is I tighten the opposite corners and only one of them. I won't do all four of these. I will. Okay, so see how there's. So then what I'm going to do is loosen these. Basically, two sides. This seems to have a pretty good wobble. It's funny, when I push that like that at opposite corners, it seems a lot better. So that's always a I can honestly say, and it's probably because I'm on camera, but this is the first time that, maybe maybe this desk surface is anywhere near as flat as I thought it was. I'm gonna do say go diagonal, so I got this one. Do this right. These ball in, they've got the little palm thing. Okay. They make it much easier than an Allen key, because you can put them in there and just twist your fingers. Now, funny thing is, after putting one of these together, these Prusas together, you will, or especially if you do it in a short time, you will feel cramp in your hand, because there is a crud ton of screws putting this thing, or holding this thing together. So now, what I'll do is I'll leave this on setting, and okay, I probably won't need that anymore in this. Now, I go ahead and I jump ahead of a one step, and I always put these things on, especially because I said I usually work on the glass table, and I just don't want dragging this thing around. But they're little rubber baby buggy bumpers, I like to call it, the rubber feet. Put them on and twist them. Most of the new ones, unless you find a used kit somewhere, are going to be this style that you just put in and twist. And then, this is where I said I take the original wrench, put it in, and I just turn everything snug, because I don't like stripping out extruded profiles, and using any type of power tool is definitely a riskier way of doing it. You can see, if you're watching closely, enough of these are moving. So YouTube, since I can actually see the comments, I thought it would be interesting if I tried to talk, but most of you who watch me should know what I do. I do other stuff Monday through Friday, business hours, but the 3D printing, do you know what I do? You want me to speak louder? I can't get that camera too much closer, but I can try to talk louder. So if guys, if this is easier, let me know. If this is better sounding, sorry. If I just speak up, give me a thumbs up or something. Okay, I'll just talk louder. Yes, the kickstand is my little design and my thing that I sell. The installation driver, as you can see there in this, I've got the extended battery on it. This screw right here was pretty loose. So I have the extended, I have one of the XCs, and as you can see, it stays standing up. Pretty simple little design, works pretty well. It's on the website. So I will try my best to talk louder. But what do you? If you all know what I sell, comment what I sell. Give me a holler, letting me know that you guys are listening. Yeah, these ones in here, even with the ball end drivers, it's always a bigger pain in the butt to get those in there. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Amazing. All right, so let me make sure I don't lose my bit. Probably won't need this anymore. Put this out of the way. Okay. So they're basically telling you, yeah, make sure this, that, good stuff like that. Check your geometry. Put your rubber feet on. All right, now these guys. These are what hold the linear rails in place. So they always give you like a preview . So 3D printer for a beginner, I'd say that is, maybe not everyone says beginner, but 3D printers, what would you recommend? I get that question a lot. And sometimes I answer that question with a question, but I do always pose the question, what type of beginner are you? Are you good at assembling stuff? And do you like to tinker? And by tinker, I don't mean like, I like printing little silly things that I'm barely ever going to use. I mean more of, do you want to spend time fixing the printer? Or do you want to spend time printing? I'm building the Prusa mk3s. i3 mk3, i3 mk3s. So third revision with an S, because it's got a small amount. So if you notice what I'm doing, if not, I'll show you to the camera here in a second. I am taking a small amount of time to separate my nuts. So that way, when I'm looking at a picture, and it calls for a certain type of nut, I've got it where I want it, and I don't have to look and go, which one do I want? So, I basically just set lock nuts there, square nuts, and then hex nuts, and good to go. All right, so in this step, basically, Prusa puts pockets in these parts, and you have to drop nuts in them, and give you pliers, and sometimes I find it's easier to grab it by the open hole, put it against a flat surface, sort of get it started, slide it in. One of the things Prusa talks about is that you always want to make sure that the nut is seated in enough that you can see, and that is where an Allen wrench does come in handy, because the part will be at the surface, and you just need to put the Allen wrench on the little nut and push down a little. Good to go. So in this step, I am just, I guess you could say I'm just nutting my parts. All my terrible jokes. If you guys look at Prusa's website and wonder why their lead time is the way it is, I think it's because they don't have an automated way of putting these guys together, which means, and as popular as they are, there's somebody sitting in a room putting a bunch of nuts inside 3D printed parts, moving on to the next step, putting a bunch of nuts in, moving on to the next step. So One, you wonder why it goes from, I think, 750 to 1,000. Well, because you're paying for time. I'm trying to think, I don't know if there's a record. I know one of the most recent videos was from Shop Nation. I think he said he put it together, the video for the assembly, he had everything laid out, and I think the video for the assembly was about an hour, but he said it was shot, fast forward, and all that over a period of 4 or 5 hours or something like that. And a lot of people post, you know, that they're like 12 hours in on their printer install. So yeah, that's crazy. I get it though. I mean, they take time. Okay, so we are probably done with these big ones. So then I get out my straight and my ball end, and right now what we're doing, and we're not putting these in tight, I do remember that, and we're putting it with the screw side facing the front plates, and we basically put these in, not too snug, just enough. You could use that impact, or sorry, that installation driver, I think, and put stuff like these in. I really do think you could do it. I think if you set your clutch low enough, and I thought about it for this video, but I have not installed anything other than the aluminum parts. And, sorry, I have not used it on assembling anything other than the aluminum parts. And to me, I thought it would be hilarious if the first printer that I actually used the install driver on for any of the plastic parts, I destroyed said printer. So not going to do that. And as you can see, I am assembling it right now, and it's not going terrible. I find it funny that there are so many zip ties holding this printer together. That is one thing I have learned. But I guess, did you respond? So, for Enigma, so the beginner, because I didn't see the comment, what I'm going to say is it just really depends on what type of beginner you are. And also, if I say that I think a Prusa is better because you don't have to tinker with it, I don't necessarily mean the same tinker. So an Ender 3 Pro is almost what we started with. Technically, the first printer that we bought was an Ender 5, and we didn't get the Pro, we actually got just an Ender 5, and we ran it like that until it started having the infamous Creality hot end clogs, whereas the PTFE tubing backs off the nozzle, and it causes a glob, and that causes drag, and then you get inconsistent extrusions. We bought that first, and that thing ran for 6 to 8 months solid, no problems, which cracks me up because the Ender 3s, we had some that we would buy that would run for 2 months with no problems. We had some that would run for 5 months with no problems, and some that would come out of the box and have the extrusion issues. So the Ender 5 non-pro, I think, is like $325, and the Ender 3 Pro, I wouldn't ever get the Ender 3 non-pro because the rail that it rides on is smaller, whereas the Pro is, you know, the larger millimeter, and I would just start that way. That's my personal opinion. And with that, the Ender 3, I can't, even though it's like $219 for the Pro, with having ones that I've had to right out of the box work on, things that I've had to work on right out of the box are the beds not being at all level. And to me, that's one of the biggest downsides. Even if you have auto bed leveling, if you have a nice, true, flat bed, you don't even need auto bed leveling. Once you get your baby step where you want it, your printer's going to work great. Whereas if you've got dips and all that, you're going to always have inconsistencies, and your bed leveling is only going to be able to make up for so much of that. So I don't really like that. The extruder arms break on the Ender 3s and cause inconsistencies. Sometimes you don't even notice the break, it's a hairline fracture. Sometimes it just gets weak. And literally just buying one of the silver upgraded extruder arms, extruder upgrade kits that say Creality on it, even though they're not really Creality, are definitely a better way to go, because they keep force on the filament going through the extruder. So I just think that that's a necessity, seeing as that extrusion is important in a 3D printer. Here's one of the steps, I'm gonna change subjects, here's one of the steps where I find using a screw to pull your nut in. So when it's got a deeper hole like this, sometimes it actually helps to use a longer screw, but you put the screw into the part from the back, you slide the nut on, and get it started. And then you basically use the pulling force of the screw to pull the part down inside the hole. But what I was saying is that the Ender 3, because of it coming out of the box with problems, and I know there's a lot of people, especially if you post in the Creality forums, that'll say, you don't know anything about 3D printers if you don't know how to mess with the Marlin on it. Well, that's what I mean by the tinkering. I don't want to level a bed. I don't want to get tin foil, because that's what one recommendation is. Right? I don't want to get tin foil. I don't want to go mess with all that crap, okay, on a brand new printer out of the box to be able to use it, okay? What I want to do is use it and do maintenance items, and that's about it. I also don't think you should upgrade your printer right out of the box, and I'll get into that. But really, what I'm saying is that the Ender 3 out of the box can sometimes be a complete piece of junk. And that is not to say that you can assemble your Prusa wrong. What I'm saying is that that printer has only a few steps to assemble, and you might assemble it wrong, but the bed being unlevel, the actual piece of aluminum that the bed goes on, having 2 or 3 sheets of papers out of whack is ridiculous. An extruder arm that lasts for 2 weeks or 2 months, that's ridiculous. The PTFE tubing backing off, that's a side effect. There's a lot of things out there called like the hot end fixes and whatnot, and those are meant to get around problems like that. Okay, I'll give you that. So I got this idler installed, and they talk about the dot, make sure the dot faces up. It's the front pulley, but I don't like that. Now, weird thing is the Prusa, or sorry, the Ender 5 that we got was the first printer we got, and that thing just ran forever. So if you have $325 to spend and you're in a hurry, I would recommend the Ender 5, just Ender 5. I heard the Ender 5 Pro, and is a nice option, but I would say an Ender 5. If you have a little bit of time and you're not worried about filament sensors, because technically the Ender 5 non-Pro doesn't have a filament sensor, doesn't have that. The Mini, the Prusa Mini is awesome. It's like 2 bolts to put it together, and it's like $350, something like that. I get them with the textured sheet and the smooth sheet, and I get them with the filament runout sensor. And by the time you do that, it's like $380 or like right under $400. I think they're at 7 weeks. In fact, I've got a couple more on order. That 7 weeks isn't terrible for me. If I have an increase in jobs, then yeah, I need it now, but I'm not gonna have it now. I can get the Mark 3s in about 3 weeks, but you have to assemble it. So if you don't want to do a ton of assembling and you're saying I don't mind tinkering, get an Ender 5, but if you need it now, get an Ender 5. We need the Y-axis stepper, by the way. Get an Ender 5. I think it's pretty reliable. You can do some basic upgrades for a small amount of money, and I think you'll have a pretty fine setup. Installing more nuts. The where you start getting into hairy things is where if you say, okay, budget's not an issue and I don't want to have to worry about fixing the printer from its inherent design flaws. Well, that's when I'd say 100% then get a Prusa. Because I'd say, and people on the Creality would argue with me, but the fact that the hot end on those Creality printers have to constantly have maintenance because of that PTFE tubing being right up against the bottom side of that nozzle, yeah, no way. Trucker. So I just, yeah, I just wouldn't. I know I'll make a lot of people. I would never recommend the Ender 3. I get a lot of people who ask me, I'm looking at getting an Ender 3, what can you recommend? And I go, don't get an Ender 3. You go, no, really, and I go, just don't get an Ender 3. I can understand that there are a lot of people out there that make them work, but I am trying to spend my time designing stuff and printing things for you guys, and for myself if I ever get time. But I'm trying to print the stuff that's functioning, and I'm trying to spend time maybe in Fusion 360 or maybe in, I don't know, editing a video I do, or coming up with more ideas, or working a job. I don't want to sit around and, sorry, I'm just checking to make sure I'm doing this right. I don't want to sit around and have to constantly recut my PTFE tubing and reseat it to my hot end. I have upgraded most of my Ender 3s, and I'll tell you, I won't buy another one, but I have upgraded them to micro Swiss hot ends, and you have to tweak the printer a little bit after you do that. I always say calibrate your E-steps and play with your retraction. But that gets rid of some of the problems because the PTFE tubing doesn't sit right against the nozzle. We're going to slide this out of the way for a minute. So, okay, we need this. We need some bearings. And yeah, I am just throwing the trash on the floor because in the interest of time, I'm trying to assemble this, not spend time. This is why I got the nut drivers, because I did not want to sit around trying to, I've used a socket at home. Okay. I don't want to sit around and with a pair of needle nose pliers turn those things on. It's just annoying. Now, you don't need lube for this yet. One of the big things they tell you to do is to make sure that the bearings, because there's a row of bearings, see what axis is it on. It's like, it looks like they're 90 degrees to each other. It's to make sure that your linear rail, your rod, when this is mounted in this carriage, it's not directly applying the force on top of the bearing. It's in the center, so it's split on each side. And they tell you, you gotta get these things centered in here left and right, this way, and then you don't want to over crank these guys down. But what I find the easiest thing to do, right, is get it in, don't worry about its alignment, get your nut in on the, get your other nut on, and grab your wrench. I always look at the amount of threads that stick out to know how much I've tightened it. And it just makes sure that it can still wiggle. And then I move on to the next one. It's funny, sometimes these U-bolts have to be squeezed in one direction or the other. So if you had that problem like I just did, take your bearing back out, get your U-bolt in, and then proceed. So I wanted to ask you guys, what number Prusa do you think this, well, I'll say I have a Prusa Mini, so besides the Prusa Mini, what number is this for me? First person to guess it gets a yay. I feel like I should have also had elevator music playing. Some really fancy elevator music. If you've put any of these printers together, even using a channel lock like that is better than these stupid needle nose. I mean, they're nice for a bunch of the other parts on this printer, but sitting here, even if it's just, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 6. 11, 17. Not 11. It's less than that. Total number of printers, maybe. The number of Prusas, it is less than that. Okay, so now that I've gotten those where I want it, I basically rotate it to where I know that when this shaft goes in, it's not riding directly on the bearings, and then it's good left and right. I tell you that once it touches, turn it 90 degrees. I take my finger, point it like that, and then just turn it 90 degrees. I'll line my finger again, turn it 90 degrees, make sure my bearing's not loose, move on to the next side. Make sure that my bearing, the rod is not going to be riding directly on the bearing. Left or right is wrong. So get it centered. Left and right, make sure it didn't turn. Get it to where just touching. They always tell you that when you tighten U-bolts that you always want an even amount of tension, and that's typically because you don't want it pulling more on the one side more than the other. So I always just look at the number of threads that stick out. So now that I got it to where it's just touching, 90 degrees, 90 degrees, feels good, it's not wobbly. Rotate this bearing where it's not resting, get it centered left and right. Now this one's fairly loose, so if I can't move the bearing, I back it off, because the point that Prusa has is that you don't want to crush this bearing casing. Okay, so now make sure I'm where I need to be. Finger, index it 90. 90. Good. Okay. Now to check your work, you are going to need to put these rods in, and I tell you to take the second to longest. Not the longest, but the second to longest. And one of the ways you can tell you did a good job is put this guy in here. That goes from one right into the other. One, no balls fall out. Nobody wants their balls to fall out. And then two, it went in, and when it went through, it was aligned. So that's good. Okay, so that guy is there. And it's hilarious if you look at the picture of them sitting there tightening this thing with those poor needle nose pliers. No. Okay, so now you're basically setting the printer back on here. Okay, and we then, let's see, I always make sure two are on the left side. All right. So flip it back over, place it in here. And these little Y carriage, they click into place basically. you want to make sure it clicks in. Then they tell you to put a zip tie around it, which again, this is hilarious, but you know, I guess that if you had a jam, or if you needed to flip it over to get to the bottom, you had to take something apart, it's easier, I don't know. But there are 4 sides to this, so we're gonna need 4. It's funny, they're very particular about how you want to put these on here. Which is basically, you don't want to make sure that the head of the zip tie is out of the way and doesn't foul anything. So, it's not 11. So far I've only gotten 1 guess. I was asking, how many 3D printers do you think, sorry, how many Prusa i3 Mark IIIs do you think I have? Any guess? This, yep, Dan, you got it. This is number 5. I started off, and I think at one point I had 11 or 12 of the Enders. I had a bunch of Ender 3s, a couple Ender 5s, an Ender 5 Plus, and we were just having hot end issues, and we were having inconsistent extrusions, and we wanted to be able to print PETG as well. And a lot of people say, I can print PETG all the time with my Ender 3, and that is true. No changes, you can even print it. But if you have bed issues, you're going to have problems with PETG. If you have extruder issues, you're going to have problems with PETG. So, well, that one didn't like that. I pulled that too. So, very simply, for us to print in PETG, I convinced Jake's girl to let me get the Prusa, even though it was, I think, 4 times the cost of an Ender 3. And for a while there, with just little upgrades, we were keeping pretty reliable stuff with the Ender 3, but we were only able to print PLA. I tried PETG, and it would fail, and I had customers, so I said, you know what, we're going to just keep printing PLA. Well, eventually we just didn't, you know, we weren't pleased with it, so I said, let's at least get one so that we can see how we like it and get used to printing in PETG. So, got the one Ender, or got the one Prusa, and it just did an amazing job right out of the box. Down the road, we had a clog that we had to replace some stuff on it, but generally it just did an amazing job. I'm installing the Y motor, Y-axis pulley, pretty straightforward. Remove the grub screw. Still have never figured out why it's called a grub screw. I'm guessing because it's small and goes in a hole. I tell you to not overly tighten it because you're going to adjust it, but you want to get it where it's not pushing on the actual stepper motor, and there's a gap. And yep, we can go from there. All that fun stuff. Now, we need to do some stuff with some belts, the tensioner. So let's look at our picture. I want to do this, do that, do this. Okay. We're installing block nuts on the tensioner itself, but on the parts that hold it, we are not. They get like inserted in there. These ones, you typically don't need pliers because it's halfway open. And I find that you don't really need to, because you can get your pliers on it like that. You don't even really need to mess with inserting a screw to get it started. Now, lock nut, you may or you may not. Sometimes the little screw idea helps just so that you can get stuff in there, because if you've got big fingers or whatever, so I'll like put the screw through, I'll put the lock nut on, I'll pull it, and now I can take the screw back out and it pulled it in there, and it works pretty easy. So setting it on its side. Okay, get our belt. It looks as if we're going to install the back one first, so it's pretty easy the way they do this, and it's pretty, I'd say, ingenious, right? So you fold the belt over on itself. You pinch it. And you take the bracket that doesn't have, let's see. Does have the lock nut. Got this sort of sticking through. It wedges itself in as soon as you push it in. And then you just got to get, not that one, screw it through the hole straight, because this belt will come out crooked. And just because it's folded over on itself, and then just a little bit of tension, tightening it down on that nut, causes that belt to lock in place. Plus, because it's rubber, it's like it's a lock nut. So, that's typically what I do at home. I always drop stuff, and then I'm calling kids that have better eyes to crawl under tables to look for stuff. Ever used the ball style, one of the nice things is something like this, for example, where you can't get a good straight shot to the tool. The nut itself, the screw, that I can come in here, and once I get it seated in there, I can, from an angle, tighten that, and I don't have to have a straight shot. Find that nice about it. That's one of the reasons. And something like this, where you're going into this aluminum plate, would be such a pain in the butt. So you pretty much loop it around the pulley, above the frame, back around this pulley, and then you're doing the same thing here. Now I've learned from doing this wrong enough that you want to make sure that you fold this around so that you can get your axis tight enough, that you engage enough teeth in this fold around here. Otherwise, when there's a lock nut in here and a screw and a slotted hole, this thing will not pull tight enough, and you will not be able to get any tension on that belt. So, if you have to take it back out because you made it too tight, I guess that's not the worst thing in the world. So the way I can tell what I'm going to do before I even do it is that I already have a little bit of tension and my holes line up, and I'm all the way at the back of the hole, which means I know that it's already gonna be tight when I put it in here to some level. I get it going through, I take my ball end style, get the screw started, and then with this, you are not over tightening this because this is adjustable. It's sort of the point of this, is that you need to put the long screw in, and when you put the long screw in, you want to be able to tighten the long screw all the way to the nylon, the lock nut basically. That is going to allow you to get that tension. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm going through the top of the carriage. Can't use a straight one, but by going through the top and using this ball end, I can get to it, and which I would not easily be able to do with a regular Allen key, or if I was able to physically do it, it would be a pain in the butt because you're sitting there turning, 90 degrees at a time. So now I'm applying tension to the belt, and then you can see that it slides. I always check the tightness of the fixed end. Don't tighten that up too much. There's going to be a little procedure. Okay, so now what we're going to do, they're basically saying strum this, make sure you're all good, and then we'll do a belt tension thing, which I want it tighter. Okay, then they basically tell you that you turn your stepper, you put your pliers on the flat end of the stepper shaft, and then you basically move the carriage to see if, one, your belt starts popping cogs, and two, that the belt sort of creates a ripple or a wave effect. And if there's a huge ripple, and that means you're not tight enough. The other thing I do while I have it at this setting, which I don't think they say to do this yet, I don't think they did, I missed it, is that I check my pulley alignment. And they don't. I don't like having my pulley on my stepper to where my belt touches one side. So if I notice that it's all the way to the left or all the way to the right, what I'll do is I will loosen it, and I will, except for, keeping in mind what they say about not having it touching the stepper motor all the way, I will slide it over a little bit so that there is a hair. Close that gap and basically get my belt off so that it's not always diving into the side. And then I really tighten those grub screws. Let's see. one thing they warn you about is running a stepper motor on its axis fast, because you introduce current back into the board, it's disconnected. I'm not worried about it. Okay, so I like that. I'll give everything a little tight in here. Then, and I probably, let's check it here. So, over tightening, I like it stuff. One thing I'm gonna do, yeah. Now I'm gonna go back to these front ones, where I said we leave these loose, because we wanna tighten these up. Now, I would love to see a video, because you know it's hard when somebody says, well, my hand can tighten at XYZ and my hand can, you know, plastic is plastic. I have yet to watch the Prusa tour well enough to catch this, but I don't know if they print these parts solid or not. And I'm betting if you can get a pretty good grip on a wrench that you can crush a part. They tell you not to over tighten, right? Well, what's over tighten? What's their definition, right? Some people can sense when a thread is about to break off on the head of an engine. Some people can't, and that's when they're saying, I need a new head. Right? So you imagine that you go call Prusa up and say, I broke all these parts. They're going to laugh at you and say, what did you do? And you're going to say, well, I thought he said, turn it till it's tight. I said, well, then you turned it too much. You're going to say, well, it didn't feel tight to me. So, I am allowed to eat. I get 15%. I get 6 gummy bears. And you know, the good thing about getting 6 gummy bears is that it's dinner time. I'm pretty hungry. So, there it is. That's what some people do in a day. We're going to move on. All right. X-axis. I did orange. So we're going to do orange. I'm going to wipe some of this grease off. Okay. So, if you saw the pictures, we're going to basically be using these. They're going to tell us which rods to use, blah, 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 all that good stuff. So let's look, let's see. We're moving on to another spot. Let's find the hardware for it. So there's lots of linear bearings on this one. Another pulley. Some nuts and bolts. Separate my hardware by length. Separate my nut type. More bags. Big Squirrel will be happy. I joke with her, like, if we just keep buying 3D printers, then we won't have to worry about buying bags. And she laughs and says that's stupid. All right, so this end has where our stepper motor is going to be. It needs a nut inserted in. Allen key to drive that down deep in there. And then one of the longer screws, because this basically works as an idler to keep tension. So they pretty much tell you to drive this thing in until you see it pumping through, or poking through, and back that thing off. Okay. Now on here, it is important that the, try honestly, don't know why we can't do this now. What was it? Oh, the bearings need to be offset to each other, if that makes any sense. So you don't want the bearings all to be in a line. You want them to be like that. Now, this is not assembled. We're going to put this smooth pulley in. I'm gonna try it. Put the screw through without the bolt in yet because I have never gotten that one in well. Line it up with the hole and then try to just tighten it to pull it into place. Now on this one, this is important, right? You don't want to crush this part. And you want to make sure that it seats. So you can pretty much pull it and see, and then you also want to slide this bearing to make sure. So I sort of do a little combination of both. I make sure it seats, and then I back it off a little. And then I spin the pulley, tighten it a little, still goes, nice and free. You don't want any drag on it. Okay. So these bearings, let's see if I can try to show this off. If I had the time, I would have opened all this up and had all this spread out on the table for a pretty little picture, but I didn't. All right, so the bearings, there is a lip on this side if you're looking at it like this, which means the bearings can't go past that. But you want the bearing all the way down to there, and you want the bearing at the top. So what I find is to take the bluntest Allen wrench that you have and use it to slide the bearing down, okay? And just, like I said, you do need to align the bearings, but you can put one in first. And you don't ever want to push on the inside of the bearing, but you can push on the metal outside. But get the bearing into the top, get it in there, and then take your blunt Allen and put it on the outside of it and push down. And make sure when you push down that if you look through this side, that you can see that it's seated. And then you sight it, right? And you can see that your bearings are in a certain position. So then you take your top one and you just get it a little bit started, you look through, and then you can turn and just make sure that they're indexed properly. And then you can gently push those in with your finger, and you get it just there at the surface like they tell you. Now I'm going to rinse and repeat. So I would feel for the lip, put the bearing in without paying attention, because the first one doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to check to make sure that I don't have a burr. Flat, and then put the metal on metal, push it all the way down, seated I can see, sight in my bearings, clock it, I think as some people would call it. Get it flat with the surface, and you're good to go. Okay. I'm going to double check that my bearing moves. All right, now they're saying take the longest rods. And here's the fun part. This freaks me out every time. You got to put these rods, and there's these little windows. And you want to make sure, right, because as you come to this window, the rod will appear, and when you get to the deepest part of the hole, you'll see it. I swear to God, I feel like I'm breaking this every single time. Push it, make sure it's at the window, you're good to go. Now, we're going to make sure that we are putting it together properly. Okay, so I've got that on. Now what I'm going to do is slide down before I put that side on my other bearings and see why I got the napkin out. Alright, picture shows 2 on the top, 1 on the bottom. So, and these you don't have to worry about indexing them, they say, because, well, you don't have to. Slide your bearings down. Make sure you're looking at it right. I'm holding it. I got the bearing down. I got this thing here. Okay, I'm going to go here. Now, I find it easier to put it like this and make sure I'm seated. Good to go. That, okay, so I had more problem with the bottom of the frame this time and less problem with that. All right, now, I need to get my x-axis. Oh yeah, I put this down here on the floor. X-axis, okay. Alan, I'm not joking when I talk about these, VHA, if you want to say it right, Allen wrenches. These things are the cat's meow. Get a set of these. If you're going to build one printer, and you know you're buying the printer, I'd get it ahead of time. I love them. Okay, so now, we don't need to seat that bearing anymore, so we don't need that. That's the Allen. Our spaces. All right, so now we're going to drive a couple screws in, where we're going to essentially attach the stepper motor. And we're not going to go crazy because it has to be adjusted. So for now, just get all 3 of them in and get it to where the stepper motor can pivot. Because if you remember earlier, we put like an idler in there. I don't want to say idler, actually what I want to say. We put a screw that allows you to set the tension by basically, when you tighten this screw on the top up, it pivots on this bottom screw and allows it to rotate in here, pivot. So if you apply tension to that, or if you apply, if you tighten that, it pushes on this screw here, putting tension on the belt. Okay, so that's what we are looking like, right? Good. So we're allowed to eat a few more, and I hadn't even finished, so we're behind. So I'm allowed to have 4, so I'll set 4 aside. I am trying to talk louder, but honestly, I keep forgetting, so I will do my best. Helmet cam. So, trying to think if there's a way to actually get you guys closer on this or not. Because that's what I'm hearing, is that you'd like to be closer. Any better? Maybe if I sit more here. What do you think? Is that any better? Okay. The axis assembly. We got the x-axis done there. I'm gonna slide this thing together. We're gonna get some parts. These guys, these guys. All right. So let's slide that out of the way. One of my gummy bears. We're gonna get this guy back out. hardware sorted. I know that some people might think it's a little anal to sort the screws, but when you're putting it together and it's saying this and that and they're all sitting there in a big pile, they all start looking like they're the exact same size except for the long ones compared to the really short ones. So I personally take the time and do it. Alright, so we're going to pull out the 2 stepper motors for the Z. You got to take these things off. We'll need them later. Somewhere originally were these 2 plastic covers. They're threaded, and I find that if you do it properly and get it started to turn, you can apply downward force and twist, and that'll put this little dust cap all the way down. You don't want to get it like cranked on there to where it necessarily makes it tight. You want to get it on there so that it won't cause a clearance issue later. See, sometimes you get lucky and you can just put pressure, get it spinning, and it goes down. Okay, so there's those guys, right? So now, talking about proper placement. The power supply is on this side, the controls on this side, so you need your longer one over here. You've got enough length to get by. Now you need these guys. We're going to bolt those on. Okay. I'm going to move my screws. And say left and right and all that good stuff. Right, left, obviously. Should know that. Just like everything else. Get it on. Don't necessarily tighten everything right away. Now, I will say, I have no problem admitting that the first time I built mine, I had these all assembled, and then I remembered to go back and tighten that. So don't do that. Get them on, get all 3 lined up. Aloha. I would really love to be able to say that to whoever said aloha in person. But yeah, you get these parts lined up, you get all 3 in, and then you go ahead and tighten them down, because these 2 are loose. You will not be able to tighten them back up once you have the actual Z-screw steppers installed. It just won't. It's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. It's in the way. And then you would have to drop them out completely, and that is a big pain in the butt. So, I guess they're back to me. Like I said, once I had all 3 in, I get them nice and tight. I am not going to be able to do it later. So somebody guessed the number. I have 5. This is number 5. I actually have number 6 on order. And I have some minis on order as well. The minis have a longer lead time. They have smaller bed build surface. But they also take up, I think, less room in my farm. They're nice and quiet. I like that. And it is a very simple design, especially when I get it. It's like a couple screws to put it together. So I'm a fan of that. So yeah, all right, so now you pretty much lift up the frame. I make sure my wires are facing backwards. Lift up the frame, slide that over. Okay, so there I go. I'm gonna grab my pivot one. I'm gonna get a screw started. Get it all the way through. Get it in. Time to move on. So, if you're not good at building things, I'm not saying don't get a 3D printer. I find it interesting. There's a lot of people out there that can't put a 3D printer together, and when they buy their 3D printer, the reason that they're picking the Mini or the Ender is because it only takes a few screws to put it together. And that's true. There's definitely a lot less. I'd say the most complicated part of this is actually, I don't know if the word complicated, is the wires leaving the hot end area, routing through the whole assembly. It's just a big pain in the butt. But the rest of it, it's just making sure you don't use too long of a screw in areas that you shouldn't. Other than that, I don't find the assembly complicated. I can occasionally say that something's a pain in the butt. Flattening the carriage, maybe, tightening the screws, getting parts in that are 3D, because you know, these are all 3D printed except for the frame and the bottom part. The rest of this stuff is all 3D printed. It's PETG. It is susceptible to problems, and they have pretty good quality control. I've seen some of the videos where they go through their line and they check the parts, but you get a little hair of filament in the part, and you're trying to get one of those little nuts slid in there as well, and you're gonna have a problem. So you can blame that on them, I get it. And like, oh, it's, you know, the Prusa uses, or sorry, the Ender uses machined parts or stamped parts. This doesn't, but for it being 3D printed, it's insane how well of a job it does printing. And you know, you're comparing that to, let's see, Prusa? That's crazy. Okay, so this is a part that they say people always do wrong. Which is, there's a spot in here you slide one of these nuts into. And I think what I'll do is move this for a second. And I believe I like the method of pick the nut up with a pair of needle nose, line it up with the hole. Oh, come on. Okay, there's one. There's two. Okay, so you then take these guys, they say it doesn't matter. Just make sure you put it the right way. And then you take two of your longers. What I like to do is rotate it in and get that first one that's embedded It's already being a pain in the butt, so. So right now, if you're wondering, what I'm trying is that nut would not go in that hole far enough to clear and to line up with the screw. Alright. Success. Drop the part, make a surprise. In case this side tries to do the same thing. Take a little bit more time. Okay. It's funny. So it's not. Okay, so like I said, I like to start with that. There is another that goes here, and this is much easier, but I like to do it sort of reversed, which is I'll put the screw through, I grab my nut, and I just sort of use the screw pulling technique. And tighten it down. See, every time I try to do it against my best judgment, the way that I found works. So. Tighten that up. Tighten it up. Okay. Now, they're telling you to put it together. So, we'll get it back out, up here on the table, and we're basically getting the threaded parts started. And just get it going there a little bit. You don't have to go crazy. All right, now we're going to put the top braces on. But to do so, we're installing the last of these puppies, which slide it through the ball bearings. And if you put these on in the right order, if you put the left on the right and the right on the left, this piece ain't going to fit because it's going to slide down, and then it's not going to have a pocket to fit it. Make sure it goes in all the way. And you get your top braces. They're pretty simple. I've got one that's tight and fits the round bar. You have one that's looser that's got a pocket for the thread. You're good to go. And now you can install the top screws. the screws that go into the aluminum are the only screws that I ever have issues with. And I don't know if it's because they get powder coat or if it's just because it's metal on metal. You know, the frame's aluminum and the screws stainless or whatever. I don't know, it gets fouled or something, but it takes a little bit more time to thread that in. Heck yeah. What was it? I think we were in Hawaii last summer and we had a pretty good time. Definitely want to go to again, definitely want to spend a little bit more time there, and definitely don't want to go to an Airbnb that doesn't have a lot of photos. Because the place that we stayed in Hawaii, I think we went to Kona, or they call it the Big Island. This place was 2 miles from anything, and the walk was along this busy road, and it was essentially 2 trailer park houses stacked on top of each other, and then each one of those trailer park houses was divided in 2 with like a breezeway in between them, and plenty of electrical and plumbing red flags. But you don't go to Hawaii based on where you're going to sleep. Just saying that too. So get these suckers tightened. And once you get these guys tightened, you have, minus your print head, your extruder, a pretty complete plug-in printer. I get another 10%. I can't eat these as fast as I'm supposed to, but I need to because I need the energy. Okay, E-axis. So that's, what is that class? What's your E-axis? Come on. Bueller. I'm using this question and answer as an excuse to my gummy bears. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set this out of the way again. I'm going to grab a stepper, spare parts. Okay. So now, just saying, we need another bag of fun. I will admit that when I put this together for the first time, that this was where I got intimidated. Because I'm like, this is where all the magic happens. Right? The E-axis. This thing, so much goes on in here. Alright, we've got magnets, we got our idler for our extruder gears, we got a belt. And this has got the largest, to my knowledge, this is, in the whole thing, this is the largest variety of screws, and this is where, to me, it definitely pays off. Sorting your screws. I've put this together enough that I know stuff like this long screw gets this spring, and I can understand where some people would be like, well, I wouldn't know that. That's true, you wouldn't, and I would not ever use this video as a guide to install it 100%, but you certainly could look at this and go, after watching this full ramble on, I do not want to assemble it, I want to buy the pre-made kit. Or, I don't want to do that, I want to go buy an ender. And if I've made you make that choice, then I've done something seriously wrong. No, I'm kidding. I really would, I don't mean to trash Creality. If you love the nerd aspect of the 3D printer, if you are looking forward to flashing custom firmwares, playing with Marlin, adding DL touches, doing all that stuff, if you find the journey as rewarding as getting to the end, get yourself an Ender 3. There's a ton of upgrades you can do to them. It's pretty crazy. But if you are more into it of you want to 3D print stuff and you want to get some of the designs from Electronsmith or whatever, then get yourself the Prusa. You're gonna really wish you did. It's just, I mean, anytime I've ever gotten an argument, which I don't really get in a ton of arguments, but anytime I have gotten an argument with anyone on the sites with Prusa, it's been more of, it hasn't been that the Prusa is better, that they argue that the Prusa isn't better or whatever. They just consider it a totally different machine, right? So they don't even argue. And I respect that, and there's something to be said about that, right? Because they are not in any way, they're not the same. They are so far different. It's night and day. I think there are some people out there that's probably got some extremely heavily modified Enders that would say, well, my Ender can print a ton better than your Prusa. Okay, but out of the box, compared out of the box to out of the box, no way. The surface texture, the speed that the Prusa can print at, there's no way somebody is going to tell me that their Prusa or that their Ender is faster and has better print quality. It's not. It's not happening. Okay, so here's a spot where they tell you 100% do the screw pull method, and I agree with them. You just put the screw in the hole, push the nut onto the back side of it, tighten it down until it feels like it's nice and seated. And it actually, I really think it matters on the extruder because you want that nut seated in there as tight as possible so that when you later go back to tighten this thing up, you're not wondering, am I seating the nut or am I tight and I'm about to break something? So listen to them. It's important. They design these printers. They've gone through a lot of money. They have a nice full color manual. Listen to the man. Okay. So at this point we are making this nice little assembly where we are installing magnets for the filament sensor, and I've always thought it was pretty awesome how they did this. And the way you can tell if you did it right is if they push each other away. So that's why they tell you not to push this down all the way, so that you can come back in here and make sure that this arm always wants to pivot out. And then once you've done that, push it in there, you make sure it's seated. This is where, since I have 3 different size screws, I'm going to check that I am using an M18, or what do they call it, an M3 by 18. Because this filament sensor is important. If you use the filament sensor feature, if you run prints and you want it to pause, all that good stuff, you don't put this in properly, and that magnet's attracted, it's always going to think that it is loaded, I believe, yes, that it's always loaded with filament and not run out. And then what you do is you grab this arm and you push it and you make sure that it's always going to want to push back, and then you tighten it a little bit more, make sure it still moves freely, tighten it a little bit more. Now it's bound, and then I just back it off, and then make sure back it off again. But that thing moves nice and freely. So back to here, I'm gonna go ahead and make sure that all of these square nuts are installed. This one is deeper, this one goes in for the cap to the hole that the filament goes in. It also helps hold this little ball assembly. And they do tell you to make sure that this ball is free inside of here. And it's pretty cool how it works. Basically, the ball is round, duh, it's a ball. And when filament goes through here, the roundness allows the ball to move freely. The filament presses and rolls against the ball pushes the lever, and the magnet makes sure that it's always wanting to push back so that it's always there. And when it moves, it triggers a little sensor. Make sure there's no loose filament or any of the, like, what do they call it? Not spider webbing, what the hell do they call it? Stringing inside that assembly, because that will really be a bad day for you when your filament sensor isn't working properly because of it. I have a good pair of cutters here. Clean up any stringing. Alright, so now they're telling us to grab our extruder motor, let's grab our extruder gears. Okay, so with your wire facing down, and this guy, make sure you have it in the right position. Don't do it this way, don't do it that way. They're basically saying that when you put this thing on, you're going to need to add more screws to not put ones in the holes because something is going to go through there. M10, M3x10. Somewhere there is a company out there making M3x10 screws that is like making a fortune off of Prusa, because this thing uses a ton of M3x10s. This is another one of those parts that you really don't want to have to take your extruder, the stepper back off. So make sure you get it nice and tight. Okay. This is one of the other areas where I said this is why I like to keep and use the Allen wrench that comes with the set, because they actually tell you should use it. They also tell you that you should use a piece of filament. But it's lining up the filament path. That's right, this uses a smaller path for the filament to run by the actual extruder gear. So you get you flat to where you can get to it, slide it down. I like to sort of put it on my end, and I take my Allen key and I slide it through both places, and I sort of eyeball it. And then I don't go cranky crank on it yet. Okay. So when this is all assembled and I have a piece of filament through there, I'm going to make sure that's where I want it. Okay. So now we're grabbing other parts. This guy. Okay. Okay. I'm going to slide a nut in here. Okay. It's funny, you do want to pay attention to this. There's parts where you put the nut in this part here first, before you fully assemble this, and you're going to just drop the nut. It's happening. There's no stopping it. Okay. Extruder, following the steps. Okay, hot end preparation. Okay. This guy, where is he? They're telling you to put these two tenors in first. And you can actually get around without doing it, but it is a little harder. I guarantee, I tell you now, 100% you want to have one of the angle doohickeys. Okay. If you don't know what this is the whole reason why you bought. And look at this. So this clip, always make sure this thing is fully lifted. I always put it on a flat surface, make sure it's pressed down, and put my fingernail under, and make sure the black clip is always pulled up. Yep, I am building a new printer. You over there on Instagram, hi. But this is the E3D hot end, V6 nozzle heater cartridge. What do they call that? They call that it's basically it's a heat sensor, heat block. There's a heat break, that's what connects the heat block to the cooler, and you have a PTF line that goes to the heat break, not to the nozzle. So you don't have heat directly on that PTFE tubing, which is why it's not as big a deal. Now, let me grab something. Actually, I'm going to use this box. They do say that when you're putting this together, that it helps to place your hot end on a surface. And I have mixed emotions about that, but in a way it does. So it allows the wires to hang back, okay? But with the 2 screws that we already installed, it just makes it a big pain in the butt, but whatever, right? So you could hold this in one hand if you wanted to. So you're gonna match up these profiles, okay? And you're gonna end up with that. And then it's going to tell you that you can install some screws. Now, you need to grab this guy. Make sure we've done it. Yes, okay. So, it's telling us this blue arrow, make sure both parts are aligned. Orange, that's M2, M3 by 40s. So that should be these guys. Drop that through. It's funny, I have a lot of string on this part. On this printer in general. We will just thread it through the hole. There it goes. Okay. Now, I don't crank this down all the way. I think I'm at what, like 4 drops now? Not terrible. When you really tighten it down, that basically makes it where you can't rotate the assembly. So I try to get this hot end and this heat block square in there as possible, so your wires are coming back straight as much as possible. And I find that it is important to get this good and tight. You do not want that being loose in my book. Okay, so now they're whole like, okay, make sure you blah, 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 right? So I'm gonna set this out of the way. This guy, there's another spot where they're like, okay, you're gonna insert a bunch of stuff, you're gonna do a bunch of stuff. Make sure you seat these screws. So, these nuts. And I just slowly crank it in to its home, tighten it down. Back the screw out, put the screw in its new temporary home. It's like a foster home for screws. Make sure it starts pulling in properly and doesn't foul itself going in. Do the exact same thing. This part gets a good bit of nuts put into it. So make sure you put them all in, because I can say I've more than once, in one step or another, thought I had everything in, was putting it together, wondered why the screw would not tighten down. And it was because I forgot to put one of these in or something. So I'm gonna look around, I'm gonna make sure. There's a hole in there. Yeah, I think this was actually one of the parts. There are a few holes in here, and when you're clamping down the X carriage to the bearings, and you don't have one of these screws in here, these nuts inserted, it's just a really bad day actually, because you can't get it tightened. You've got to take a good bit of the thing apart to move forward. Okay, we're moving on. All right, so these steps get a little finicky. Gotta make sure you have the right end, and it's the end with the little lock. And you're basically, this screw right here already fell out. So we're gonna try to put it back in. Sorry, the nut. Here's what we'll do. For now, we're just gonna put one in. Okay. So hold it in this profile, and then they tell you that you should have it about 15. Okay. I always have extra room. I never really worry. So yeah. Okay. Now they're telling you to pick this guy back up. You're gonna look at your hot end. You're gonna create this little fancy Superman loop-de-loop, and then you run. You only need one loop-de-loop. You basically run this guy here. Now, the reason why is that you are going to place this on this, and you need to line them up with each other. And you already had some screws going through, if you remember. So there's holes that are lined in. So what I like to do is I just get it in there, and I grab my Allen, and I tuck the wire back in there, and then I tuck it through a little path. I bring it out the back. Right, wires. it is gonna constantly move on you. I'm gonna try something that I haven't done before. So I'm gonna try to tighten these down a little. Because what I've noticed is that you're sitting here trying to keep this thing from falling apart. Okay. So, like I showed you before, I kept tucking my wire in there, and that's because you need to keep wires out of the way of the fan. Looks good, looks good. IR sensor preparation, I'm actually gonna skip that. I know that sounds crazy. It doesn't need to be done right now. You don't, yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. You guys might be watching this, so I guess I'd rather do it. So I'll go ahead. So IR. Basically tell you, don't touch stuff you shouldn't touch. Put the pins on. Line it up to where your screw hole is. And it's the only screw in this entire batch that's like a teeny tiny little screw. And this way, you're making sure you have enough room to get your IR sensor wire in and out. And then they're telling you, okay, you've got this good. Now, you want to put one of these long ones in, and then you're doing it on the side that you don't have the window or the door to open to get your filament or any of that stuff in or out, or a clean or a clog there. And you make sure that this gap here is tight. This is important. I've had this screw loose before, or a screw inside of here loose, and I've had some weird clicking, some inconsistency, so it matters. Trust me, it matters. Okay, so we got our wires there. Now it's like, okay, you need your fan. Right? So you get this one fan, get your thing off. How long are we? This thing has been going for, how long is this string? Started 2 hours ago. 2 hours. That's a good bit of time. I'm going to say that that's a good bit of time. But, you know what? It's all good because we want to be able to put the printer together. 2 hours is not bad. So the big thing when you're putting this fan in, and we talked before, is I was using an Allen wrench to push the wires back and out of the way, is that you just don't pinch the fan cable in the fan itself when you're putting the screws in. You're tucking them back in that little channel out of the way. As long as you pay attention. You won't pinch wires, and you will be good to go. Now, these are plastic, or metal on plastic threads here, so these take a little bit more effort. Sort of like screwing into the aluminum. You don't want to over tighten, you don't want to crack the fan. Snap. They also tell you to only do 3 of them because later on you have a part that goes through and attaches 2 things at once. Because remember how I put those two screws in, holding the two housings together? Well, when I said I like to make sure that my hot end is square in there, I said I'm going to go ahead and tighten or put this part in, but I'm going to leave it loose so that I can get my wires in, and I can't get to both sides. So, no big deal, simple fix. Let's back the fan out. Allen wrench down into there. This is again the other reason that I say I love the ball end Allens. It's because you can get to impossible places with them. You can put your palm on it like this, and turn your fingers, rotate whatever. You are good to go. Okay, so that's pretty well assembled. It's not complete, but it's close. All right, so there is an access door, whatever you would call it, / the idler for the Bontex style gears. Big thing is that you make sure you put them together properly so that they mesh right, and you pretty much just hold it in the picture. There is some bearings that go in. Make sure the bearings are in there. Slide the pin in. This is the case where something like this is helpful because it pulls straight. And you just make sure that when you're doing this, you're not cranking down on these pliers in case you didn't get that shaft in the bearings properly. But these are just like parallel jaw. And I know you don't have to, but I've noticed that sometimes pushing that pin in is a pain, and I like to just methodically get it in, and then you just make sure that it spins. It does. Yay. Okay. So place it in the housing. You take this screw, you push it through, and this one I'll sort of like the last one I did. Where I was talking about like an idle or a part that needed to spin, is I mess with the door. I go like that, I tighten it, and if I hit it and it doesn't spring back, I back it off a little, and then I try to just slowly dial it in. Nope. Back it off a little. Slower. Yep. Right there. Okay. Then they're telling you to take this one that I put together already, the spring, the other, slide it through. Oh, wait. Put the nut. Don't forget the nut. And the little idler door. My choice of tension is always a few threads sticking out. Now they're saying you grab your cap. Guess what? Another M10 and 3x10. This covers your filament sensor. Makes the top look all nice and pretty. There's a little gouge in it, hogged out, whatever you want to call it. That is for the circuit board. It's funny how you build these because you pretty much build this entire unit separate. Where you could almost see where you could buy these pre-made. That would be interesting. I think you spend more time building that than you do anything else on this printer. Besides maybe wiring. And that's where I'm debating about on this video, because I'm not going to be able to show you any wiring, so there's a good chance that once we have this assembled and I have the cable management routed, maybe we'll stop. I don't know what you guys think. I don't think it's the worst idea. Big surprise, another 3x10. This part holds the part cooler fan. So I do want to talk about something that's relating to printers. I did mention about upgrades on the Ender 3. I also know that a lot of people who go out and buy Ender 3s immediately upgrade certain parts. And I don't always really believe in that. I think if you buy something brand new, it should work. But there are certain things that the Ender 3 needs, and there are certain things that the Prusa, in my mind, needs. These are from E3D, so they're made for this hot end. And it's a heat sock, it's a silicone heat sock. And it is made to slide over. It perfectly slides over this. I take an Allen wrench, and I push it around, and I make sure that the little tabs wrap around and seat. And before I put this thing together all the way, because when you buy those and you're doing them aftermarket, you got to take a bunch of crap off this. So why not do it now? Right? Okay. So that guy's on. And this is, they tell you not to push this one through all the way when you were doing the other steps, because this holds this part cooling shroud in place. Tighten that down once I put the fan on. pinda, which I'm sure somebody can comment below and say what the pinda means. But this probe is what makes these printers awesome, because it's I think it's a magnetic based height sensor. You want it basically a hair below your nozzle. And you don't need it super tight, but you do need to put the reverse loop in here. They're smart, honestly, when they tell you to build this. You build these little service loops in, and that just helps you make sure you are not later on having to tear even more of the printer apart because you can't reach something, or because there's no slack, I guess I should say, of the cable. Okay, and then one of the reasons that they didn't have you doing this earlier was because this nut just constantly falls out. So when I'm putting this last fan on, I am holding the nut in place, pushing the fan through, the screw fit through. That screw just fell out, so there we go. Okay. So what it is this is an M3 by 18. I need an M3 by 20. But right now I have this M3 by 20 holding this screw in place, the nut and falling out in place. So now what I can do is let's look. That's right. So this one goes straight out. It goes underneath the pinda holds it in place. I don't need this big of a loop for the pinda. Okay, good to go. Okay, so at this point, I've got my wires routed. Now it's telling me I need to have a couple zip ties. And that's because, like I said before, this whole thing revolves around zip ties. What you do, and it's cool, is you run these zip ties through here. And they let you attach this to the carriage with ease, if you want to call it that. And then when you put the back bracket on, then you tighten it down. Okay, so. So we're gonna grab this back again. Okay. And we're gonna take this down a little. The big thing we need to do is our wires. For everything but the hot end, need to come through the center. Hot end ones just hang. Then, as long as this is standing upright, you don't need that screw in there. These bearings will seat in a certain spot and then not come out of there. Okay? And then you can cinch the bearings down. Not cinch the bearings down, what am I saying? You can cinch the zip ties down. And what I would almost say is, don't go crazy in case you think your bearings aren't where you want it. Get it in there left and right. Then pull it in. Okay. And grab your snips and snip it. Okay. So you can see already my wires are not terribly a mess. Could be worse. Get this one where it needs to be. And now we're going to play with the belt. Okay. So, it's pretty easy, I think. But what I like to do is I feed it this way first. I put it all the way in here. Seat it like they say. It's basically got like a bunch of teeth in that printed part. Since I already put it through there once, on that top, I can easily push it back through on the bottom. Okay, passes all the way through. There's a little spot for it. And now proper. Make sure your belt's not twisted. Beat it around and back. So I clearly have, say the mistake number A. Who wants to keep track? Somebody can in the comments. Which is that I have this pulley flipped. So I'm going to turn, take the pulley off. I had it this way, I need to take it this way. Make sure my flats. Okay. So now, let's see if okay. Now that I have the pulley on properly, we'll align that later. Okay. So this whole thing, right, pivots, we've talked about before, right? So you imagine if you have it all the way up here and then you stuff this thing through there, then you've got some range of motion. Now one of the things they tell you to do is to, you basically pull it as tight as possible. You get this thing started in here so that you're tensioning it before you even tighten down the screws. And you cram it in there, and they're telling you to use a white marker. I haven't had to use a white marker. And then you pinch these, and the idea is how much tension can you get? So if you can turn the motor and get a good bit of tension, what do they say here? Using 2 fingers on your belt or your left hand, push the belt together. Very small force should be needed for bending the belt, but it shouldn't be bent on its own with the weight. So that's true. So then they're basically saying that you basically, redo the tension. Okay, but I do it a little differently. So what I do is once I get, so the force is being applied there. So let me rephrase it. There is no force being applied. And I've gotten it to at the bottom. The problem is you got to cut this thing off. So what I do is while I have it in there, I cut it 1 tooth too little. And that way, if I ever need to make it tighter, I just have to bend the belt out of this little gator area. And this is another place to use an Allen. I basically seat this guy in here so that your belt is in there nice and true. But you want that guy back in there so the belt is on the track. If you want to call it that, it's not, I guess, a track per se, but it's leaving this assembly square. Okay. And then they're basically telling you, you mark it, you cut it, you mark it, you cut it. Now, what I then do is they're telling you to come over here and, like the bottom, make sure that if you rotate this, that you're where you need to be in your pulley so that your belt is, I guess, aligned, like I said earlier, so that your belt is in the center. Crank that set down, turn it, crank that down. Then you can go like this. And they basically, in this step, we'll finish tensioning the weld. Please read the instructions and be extremely careful while tightening. You can crack the part. Okay. So basically, you go like this, right? Strong, okay. So then I come back up to here, getting the ball in, just rotate it to there. You probably could go back a little on this one. And then you tighten this guy, and this guy. And there's going to be one other step where you're basically, where is it there? Where was it? Yes, here you go. You clamp onto here, and you pull this, and you're basically making sure that my pliers came off. That you just get that wave. Okay, let's use another plier. Give this a teeny bit more room so that I can get the pliers onto it. I can barely get my pliers on the pulley. So this should give me plenty of surface area. But the idea is that you shouldn't be able to pop a tooth, and you shouldn't be able to get a big wave in your belt. You can't, which means you're good. Okay. So here's where you start some sort of cable management, and it's pretty neat the way they do this. It's I think they call it a 2 millimeter or 2.8. It's a nylon. You cut a little point to it, and then you basically stab this thing. Let's see, where does it say again? To stab this thing in the bottom hole there, and then you need to make sure when you stab this thing in that it goes in there real good and that it's, well, firm. Okay, now the last part is the cables and the carriage clamp. This guy. These all attach using the little nutserts that we've already put in before. So, if we've done it right, one thing you can always do to check is before you put it all the way together, put part in and make sure. And if you missed one, which looks like I have one missed, which is why I checked it. Because the way this carriage is only attached to the top, I can take my part, pivot it, line it up, drop it down in the hole, take the Allen to seat it, and now I'm good to go. Okay, so next, you're assembling the doohickey to the doodad. Super technical, I know. But this is the cable management or cable support arm or whatever. Okay. So it gets a nut and then a little concave part seat the nut in here. Now this rides right where a bearing should. So this is another example of why they tell you that you want to make sure that you seat these all the way. Otherwise, this nut would interfere with this bottom bearing. And looking at it, my guess is it would pitch the assembly upwards, and you would have some weird height problems. You can tell if you've installed this correctly because it's going to line up with this little window here. Okay, so that, ta-da, right? And then next they're talking, okay, you need to push everything through here, right? It's really not as bad as it seems. So move some stuff out of the way. You got the filament, which is sort of a guide. What it does is it helps support the wires. Now, we're not running any of the hot end wires. I always find run your biggest connector first, because once you have a bunch of little ones in there, you are not going to get the big ones through. And they pretty much tell you to push them through, keep them out of the way, keep them sort of organized, da, da, da. I like to just keep a nice little pool like that. Check to make sure. Grab any of my other bigger ones. And I'm not putting that little guide through yet because it's the smallest piece. This filament sensor. Pretty small, spans are small, so success, they all fit through. Keep a little bit of tension on, and then run that guy through, successful. Push it close to the top. Make sure that it feels good and seated and not like it's interfering. You can always take it back, so I don't worry about my wires at the moment. What I'm trying to do is get this top at least on so that I know it's not going to just pop back off. Once I get that on, there's going to be 2 more screws. There's one in the center, one on the bottom. I will attempt to get these in without doing anything with wires. Attempt, like you said. One nut that I was really worried about falling out, but fell out once or twice, that I put that 20, I believe it was the 20 millimeter screw in. It's very important because that holds that cover on the back, and with that thing not being in there, you will sit there and tighten that thing forever. Okay, so that. What it should look like before we wrap it in any type of cable management, zip ties, all that. So why don't we do that? And then I say we call it quits there. Do I have any objections? Because if I'm bored and I'm doing the work, I can't imagine why. Actually, we do still have the LCD to put on, but what time is it? 9 o'clock. I'm surprised Instagram has let me keep this stream going. So the sleeve, I hate this stuff. I find that when they cut this, they heat cut this, that it gets itself bound, like molded over to itself, and then this is not like your car audio split loom where you could easily run the stuff like this. I don't know, I always find that I'm wrestling this. I feel like a monkey trying to hump a football. Interestingly enough, today it's going a little bit easier. So there's something. That's a change. Typically you want to slide this up to here. And you want to give it then a twist. And that twist helps ensure that your wires aren't going to come out. Then you undo your bundle from your hot end. You do want to get those in there. Don't use side cutters like I just did. I was just being lazy. But what I like to do is make sure that where my twist is, it's on the bottom here where these are going to go. And then you can go ahead and get some zip ties in from the top. I want to make sure it's on the bottom. The reason why I was saying that was so that I can make sure that when I want to stitch my or insert my hot end wires, that there's a hole towards the bottom to be able to get them in. So at this point I open it back up a little, right? And okay. And that is not good enough there. I'm not okay with that. So make that look better. I'm going to open this up more. Couple things is it's important because you need to make sure that your hot end wires don't stick out past your pin to probe or anything else, because, well, if anything sticks out past your hot end or your tip, then you'll catch on it. So that generally looks okay. So I'm going to put a zip tie through, and I'm going to loosely pull it. Granted, if I over tighten it, I could always cut it, but if I under tighten it and get it where I think it's good without pulling too much, I can always move the wires a little bit more. So I don't want my hot end wires to come up the side of this little support bracket. But I'm not super thrilled where they're entering this. So I'm going to try to rotate this, which honestly looks like I need to just cut it off. Okay. And I want to tuck hot end wires up in there as much as possible. Okay, I like that better. I'm gonna put my middle zip tie back through. Make sure I can get my twist back in. And what I'm basically making sure is that these would have come like a Y instead of like a T in the road, and I have a bump out where my hot end wires are trying to rejoin or join covering. That just wouldn't work out well. So. You're funny. Okay. We have wires tucked in. So that puts us at what state? Gummy bears. It tells me that I can have 20%. I get 8 gummy bears. And you know what? I'm tired and I'm hungry. And 8 of you are still watching. Right now, is Jake's girl on here? Megan Garrett, are you on here? So we have, this printer doesn't count, so we have 2, 2, 4, 5, 5, minus 1, 4. We have 1 mini, 3 of these. We have 4 Prusas going. We have, I think, the 9 enders. So we have like 13 printers going, almost all the time. I haven't entered my Milwaukee in the pack-out contest. Partially because I didn't pay attention when they were announcing it. So I need to find a link for that. If anyone wants to comment, let me know where the link is, and I will certainly try to enter. I'll take a pretty old photo of it, because I've got a good bit. I've got a good bit. Okay. We are getting really close. More plastic bags. We need the LCD screen. I can't count the number of times I put this LCD screen together improperly. I don't know why. I guess I just don't follow directions well. But it doesn't go together the way I'm putting it yet. So what you end up doing is there's the little nut paths and all that other good stuff. So, I'll look at the directions. Yep, you got this type of motherboard, you got that type of motherboard. Alright, so they're saying make sure, you know, your cables are going this way, and you take your thing, and the one with this slides down here, one with this slides down there, and there's 2 screws. Already didn't pay attention. See, I've already done it wrong. Let's do it again. Slide this, like this, and slide this, like this. So you need to avoid that. Then that stuff out of the way. Drop this guy in. Brackets line up. Still not right. Man, I suck at this. That's right. Every single time I've put together these, I have put, there was a time where I had been using my printer for I don't know how long, and it was like every time I push a button, I wonder why the screen moves. And I didn't think anything about it. And then I got my second one, and I realized the screen moved because there were screws that go in that lock the screen in place. And I had never put them in. Now they give you extra screws. They give you a ton of extra screws. It cracks me up actually, how many extra screws there are. It's like, we know you're gonna screw up, and we know you're gonna lose something. So because of that, we will give you a few extra screws. But so I had the 2 extra screws left over from the screen, and I'm putting the one together, and I get to that step, and I was like, oh, hey, look, you're supposed to put those on there. And I was like, I wonder if that's why my screen is loose. So I waited for it to finish printing, and I popped the printer upside down, and yep, I had forgot the screws. So, not the end of the world. Turned it off, put the screws in. Back to printing. You don't really touch the screen anyways. I think the only time you get close to touching the screen is when you actually hit the panic button, which you don't want to have to hit the panic button. So if you're short on screws, usually wait, but not going to this time. If you're short on screws, don't put the ones that hold the screen onto the back. More of these little nuts that slide down in. And here is another spot I'm going to tell you you're going to wish you had. Screwdrivers that I got. Little weed Hawkins, man. They allow you to go at an angle. They are too nice. I love them. Right about now is the time that I'm going to start getting loopy. I haven't had any caffeine for a while. have, and I probably should have drank it some of it. It's funny how delayed the stream is. I don't know how long delayed I would actually say that is, but it's definitely delayed. Screen on. Alright, it says 7 people are watching. Out of the 7 of you that are watching, come on. Who wants me to continue at this point? We have the bed to put on, obviously the electronics. Part of me thinks that that's not really a big deal. Because what are you going to actually be able to see? I still haven't even finished my gummy bears and it's telling me I have more. What do we got going on here? Does it actually work? Blah, ha, no. Jinx, girl. Does it look like it's working? Battery is these. So Jinx girl, you're watching. Do you think I should quit? I don't even know what time it is. What time is it? Holy Lord, it's 9:30. I started at 6:30. So what's that? 7:30, 8:30, 9:30. 3 hours. That's really not bad. I'm honestly slacking because I still have to eat another 4 gummy bears. And as you can see, my work area is a mess. She says back to work. So let's get back to work. Okay. Heat bed and power supply. Alright, so heat bed. It's this sexy little beast. Clears our dishes. Okay, so there's the heat bed. Let's just stick that mk3s there. So here, Jake's girl, do you see how many bags I got for you? I hope you're happy. Trash, bags, lots of zip ties. Okay, back to work, she says, back to work. I can just hear her saying, back to work. Hightower, you are not the man. Okay. Let's see. So I'm like sort of Mr. Not metric, but I think they say like 235, but it looks like about 250. by, yeah, I think it's like 250 by 235, or in Freedom, about 8 inches by about 9 inches. And that's actually, that's a good question. That gives me a good segue. I get a lot of people who ask me to print bins that are the full size of the pack out. And that just can't be done. Now, there is a printer called a Ender 5 Plus, and if you guys listen to my rant at the beginning, you remember me saying that the Ender 5 Plus, or the Enders, had lots and lots of issues. So, that printer we do own, and it breaks down about every other, only 3 hours. That printer breaks down about every other 10 jobs, I'd say. We'll run it for a while. It'll all be happy and fine and dandy. And then go to reload it. Everything seems fine. It'll do its little calibration. And then it just freaks out and tries to destroy itself. Grinds its head into the print bed, which is a glass print bed, so that's fun. I upgraded it to a micro-Swiss because I was having the extrusion fun, and when I upgraded it, it didn't have the extrusion problems anymore, but the nozzles are more expensive. And when it decides to crash the nozzle into the bed, it's breaking a $20 part instead of a Creality. Well, shoot, you can get the cheap Creality nozzles. You can get a bag of 10 of them for $5 or $10. So, as you can imagine, that gets expensive to replace when the thing freaks out. You know, what's funny is I posted about it on here, and a lot of you people, like, I don't know, but if it's anyone that's watching it now, people, but the Creality people are like, oh, you can hear it hit the limit switch hit the end stop. And I will give you that yes, at some point it does. But I have watched that printer. I have moved those cables, and I can still get it to act a fool. And not because it's wired wrong. Because the printer will work and work and work and work. And then all of a sudden, it just won't work. And that's supposedly because of the end stops. Now, the one time that it did it and you could hear it going click, yes, I will agree. You are right. I am wrong. I have even said that. I've put that in the video. I have commented and said, yes, at one point you can hear it. I am sorry. I will fix it. I have now fixed it. And people still bombard me with, if you clearly listen at section so-and-so in the video, you can hear it at the end stop. Yes, I know, and it still does that. And here's the other thing. It loses you can store its Z height, but it loses it, and occasionally, instead of it's not off and I'm adjusting it positive, right? I'm adjusting it negative, which means it's far away from the bed. So I make it tighter, and I do store, you know, you think you store the settings, right? Well, instead, being far away, it would be great, you would think. Well, every once in a while, it doesn't know its Z height, and it just crams it right into the bed. Just destroying it, right? And it bends stuff, and I don't want to say it mutilates it, but in a way it practically mutilates it. Turn the printer off, turn the printer back on, rehome it, watch it. It'll freak out again, or it won't. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. You watch it, you can see where your limits are, and it's not like one of them's getting hit. It just decides that time. So you turn the printer off, turn it back on, rerun the Z-home, and it's fine again. And at that point, you put a new nozzle on it, you calibrate it, you do all that good stuff because it just ruined the nozzle. Even if it doesn't ruin the nozzle, you do still want to make sure it's all calibrated well. You print a bunch of stuff, 10 prints, 5 prints, whatever. All looks fine. And it's always typically the one time you walk away from the printer where everything was working fine, so you decided, I can walk away from it. You go upstairs, or you go, I don't know, to the bathroom, and you come down and it's just making the worst sound in the world. So that's one printer that can print, I don't know, almost 12 inches, but we can't walk away from it. Once the job's going, we will leave it go. But I would never be able to do anything with automation on it, and I definitely don't hit start and go like, I don't know, take a grumpy or something like that. It's just a hunk of, I don't know. A lot of people gave me crap because I said the printer wasn't a good printer. Said it was my setup. Creality, we opened a ticket with Creality. They looked as best as you can say they looked at it. They didn't say anything about it. We sent them pictures. They kept just telling us to reflash the firmware, reflash the firmware. So if there was something wrong with it, this is my book. If there was something wrong with it because what I was doing, I don't suppose that they would say there's something wrong with the firmware. I think they would blame it on me. I think they would clearly say, oh, we know what the problem is. You need to do X, Y, Z. So, and it's funny because in the forums, everyone defends them, even though 17,000 pages exist of people having problems with the Ender 3s and how they're junk, and a bunch of people then defend them and say, the Ender 3s aren't junk, the Ender 3s are fine. You just need to know how to rebuild the entire hot end and do Luke's hot end fix, which does work for some time, but should you have to buy a printer, brand new, right? Take something out of the box that comes with software that is supposed to be loaded and has the memory card and has Filament. Should you take something like that out of the box, brand new, and have to tear parts off of it, buy upgrades off of the internet and to make it print? I don't think so. And if you know anything about the Ender 5 Plus, you know that the Ender 5 Plus doesn't have, Creality just recently released their source for it, so now people can finally customize it. But I don't think you should have to do that. I mean, yeah, you look at car companies, and car companies have problems and they recall a car, but they're not having to, which I know some people, we can get into car companies and quality debates, but people aren't having to load different ECUs onto their Fords to get them to work. They'll just die anyways. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like, you can buy a BMW and you can have a problem with it. You can buy a piggyback tuner, but that's to get extra power. But without the tuner, the car does just work on its own, right? So I shouldn't have to. I can understand if there's a bug reflashing the firmware, but flashing the firmware or using someone else's custom or upgrading the motherboard to a different brand and then put on my own Marlin just doesn't make sense to me. I didn't buy it to do that, and I know people are like, well then why'd you buy the printer? Okay, fine. You're right. Why did I buy the printer? I'll agree with you. Why did I buy that printer? Why did I buy a printer that I assumed would work out of the box? Calibrating it, I'm fine with. All that other crap, I'm fine with. So that's my opinion. I know there's other, is it the CR10, I think, has the footprint of it, and I might try one day to get a CR10. I know that before COVID, there were talks, the Prusa Max, the Prusa something or other, that was going to be like the Mondo printer. I would buy that in a heartbeat. I've had Prusas to where I've broken apart and I've just ordered a new part. I've seen people complain that, oh, you know, the heat bed, they didn't do it right and the PET-G stuck to it. Well, if you watch Prusa's videos, you'll see they tell you, this is how you print with PET-G, this is how you do this is what chemical you use. So I don't blame manufacturers for stuff like that. So I'm giving them leniency that I've easily given to Creality, but you know, maybe I give them more because I spend more. That doesn't make sense. I don't know. $300 printer, $200 printer. I'm not expecting it to work as good. I'm expecting it to have lines in the prints, your quality type stuff like that, but I'm expecting it to be able to print. Now, one thing that I've tried asking everybody, you know, I've seen people who print Boba Fett helmets and all that cool crap, and they're like, oh, this is a 130-hour print. Okay, cool. But after they print that, what else do they print? Do they keep their printer running 24/7? Because unless we run out of filament, our printers run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, unless we go on some type of vacation. So is the printer just not meant to run that long? I'm fine with it. And you know, a lot of people, and it would explain why people say that they, oh, well, I don't have a problem, right? They're like, oh, you must have got a bum printer. Totally could agree. Maybe you guys just don't print as much as, you know, other people do. That's been my question. And of course you get the naysayers, they're like, these things are designed as long as you do proper maintenance, or some type of, you know, statement like that. Really? They are? I mean, it is a Chinese product. I mean, you can't buy a hairdryer from Walmart and get consistent out of it. You see people who, on any site, I bought this and this worked, and everyone else goes, mine works fine. I agree, yours works fine. I'm not saying yours doesn't. What I'm saying is that when these things are built and bid from the company that, especially in Creality, is a Chinese company. It's not like they're an American company that contracted a Chinese company to print or to make parts for their printers. They are Chinese all the way around. And honestly, with everything going on, their support has been pretty good. They've been reasonable. There's nothing that I would say like, oh, they suck at this. But be open and honest and say outright, our printers are not meant for this type of use. And then I think a lot of people who use it at that level will go, oh, okay, cool, I get it. All right, so that is the heat bed. We give it its little spiral, it all looks good, it's nice and clamped. Now we're gonna put it onto the printer, and this, I actually like this phase, it's pretty easy. Again, you should have a good Allen wrench. Feed your guy through here. Pop your screw through here. Poke it through the holy-doodad. Okay, and they tell you to not tighten them, right? You're just going to take your needle nose pliers, you're going to grab the little spacer, you're going to grab the countersink, and there's a tightening order, and that's all important and whatnot. But right now, we are only getting parts on here. So I just pick it up. Drop a screw. Slide it in. another. Grab another. So I am definitely not going to wire it. I'm not going to be able to show you it. Then you're just going to hear me ramble. So what I am going to do is I am going to get the bed on the way it says. Maybe mount the electronics box, but I'm thinking no. If enough people comment on this and comment on that, and tomorrow night or another night, I can go ahead and maybe go to a different area, and I could either record it offline, like not live, if you guys want me to, and that way I can, because I'm recording this in an office where I work occasionally, because I have faster internet, not recording, but broadcasting. Whereas if I do it from home, who knows on how good of a stream I can get. But what I could do is, if enough of you want to see it, I could use a flashlight, get some good light, and record me wiring up the ancillary board on camera, of course. I can try live if we all agree. So why don't you guys comment now, comment later. I don't care exactly when you comment. I do not expect to wire it up tonight when I get home, or even tomorrow, because I've got some side stuff to do. I have got some Leviton, Z-Wave, and Zigbee lights that I have to troubleshoot for somebody. Fun, frickin' fun, right? So now, in the directions they tell you to do it in the center. Then the edges. Then the corners. Okay. Now, you're basically saying you thread this down. You want to make sure that you're not hitting that. I actually do that later. Power supply. I will at least install the power supply. Right? And it makes less crap for me to have to carry separately. And they say that there's a procedure for putting this on. I have never had a problem putting this on. So there was the two screws, if you remember, we put them on the side there. You can go ahead and start these so they're just hanging out. You can get them aligned. Okay. And then you've got these upper ones, which this is what they're talking about, right? So imagine if you put it on the bottom first, and then you went and bent that, which I would argue, don't do that. Don't force the screw. Don't force the power supply. Get everything in its hole first, as always. Mount things to where the weight is not on them. Then tighten stuff down. and you won't have problems. So, what's left? Wiring up the power supply and putting the ancillary board on. So I'm going to call it there. Jake's girl, don't you comment, don't you give me crap. I know you want to, but this is a lot. This is 3 hours of work, and you can see, besides the fact that it's not hooked up to the brain, it's a Prusa Mini, right? These go, or not a Mini, these go here. Cable organization, I'll take a photo of that if you guys would like. But, like I said, comment on this video, either one of them, anyone of you that's watching on Instagram, or if you're watching this YouTube live, this will be uploaded. You'll get to see all that good fun stuff. And if you want me to record or go live, comment either one. The finalizing of this printer, I most certainly will. If you don't care and you don't comment, I'm not going to do it, because this took a lot to set up, and this was honestly more for you than it was for me. I had a couple people ask about it, and a couple people said they wanted to see it, so here it is. I don't see anyone else saying anything. Yeah, perfect temperature HVAC. Whew. Yeah, 3 hours. Still building it. I still have some gummy bears left. So that means I'm not done. But I am going to call it an evening. 3 hours. It's not bad. It looks like it's really going to be 3 hours and 20 minutes. So Kenny, do you want to see me finish it live, or do you just want me to record it, or do you just want some photos? Comment, let me know. I'm going to say goodbye to my Instagram followers. You guys rock. Thanks for watching. Honey, I'll be home soon. Love you. Oh my Lord. Well, thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. I gotta pack all this crap up. If you have any questions, comment, message me, let me know. If you want me to finish the rest on camera, let me know that too. I appreciate you all watching. You have a good one.